Welcome to The Simple Sophisticate, where in 2014, this podcast premiered. And now in its 11th season, the show continues to focus on the same principles it was founded upon: the art of living a life of quality over quantity. Topics range from creating an everyday life you love living, strengthening mindfulness practices, building a capsule wardrobe, preparing seasonally delicious meals, traveling and exploring France and Britain, and living life to the fullest without breaking the bank, because living well really is quite simple. I'm your host, Shannon Ables, and whether you're listening on your commute, exercising, working in the garden, en route, or returning from that dream destination, or sitting down with a hot cuppa or a cafe au lait, thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. Welcome to episode 399 of The Simple Sophisticate. And today's episode is a bit of a tradition. We have done a few episodes around this tradition, but every year, whether it's an episode or a post on a blog, it's been happening since 2010. And if you're a longtime listener, you know what that is. I just had the opportunity, I'm very grateful, to have celebrated my birthday just a few days ago, the end of February. So I wanted to share with you what I've learned this past year, this past 46th year. So I turned 46. And so these past 12 months, what have I learned? And that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to share 8 things that I've learned. And then this episode's Petit Plaisir is a film that, I have to be honest, I wasn't expecting that it would be chosen for a Petit Plaisir. But as soon as I watched it and watched it again immediately the next day, I knew it had to be. And I'll explain a lot of the backstory, a lot of little inside trivia questions that would be I found interesting to know when I learned about them. I'll share those with you about the film as well. Okay, let's get to today's topic. 8 things I've learned in my 46th year. There is an awareness that comes when you start stepping fully into your 40s. And it helps that there was a pandemic to really wake you up, I'll be honest, and that you make a big career change. But maybe that's why partially it happened in my 40s. But there's an awareness that prompts courage and discipline, as well as motivation to just get about the business of living out the dreams we may have been too timid to try in our earlier years. We begin to see that taking care of our health is more than worth the investment, whether we've been doing it all along or we're starting to wake up to that reality. We begin to know that loving fully is the best thing to do for our life enjoyment, even though we also know there will be great pain in the goodbye. And I'm talking about all different types of love. That goodbye, though, is a privilege only the brave experience by being wholly vulnerable, kind, and truly giving of their true selves and accepting others as theirs. The leaning that I mentioned just a second ago is a very good thing. And when we talk about leaning here, it might be that awareness that we're leaning into the second half of our life if we are so fortunate to live into our 90s. It's almost as if we are seeing over the handrail of life that we are fortunate to have with regards to this vantage point. We're fortunate to have taken so many stairs and so many stages and lived so many chapters. And now we're at a height of experience and years, and we've made it, that we can look back, but also know that going forward, it's going to fly by. And we're not going to toss it aside, that wisdom, those experiences, because we have gained so much, especially if we've been applying what we've learned so far. And even if we haven't applied it yet, we still have it. We can still reflect. We can go back through those journals. We can have conversations with people and say, okay, well, what was that experience like for you? Why do you can have, I've had some interesting conversations with my mom recently, and her perspective of what was happening in different instances in my 20s versus what I was personal experiences were quite different. And I thought that was very interesting. Those kind of conversations can be insightful, both to understanding each other, but also to seeing more clearly into what you really valued. And maybe it was different than the people you experienced it with. And that's why you made the choices that you made and they made the decisions they made. So, with all that said, this leaning is a gift and a motivator. This year, as I celebrated my 46th birthday on the tail end of February, as many of you know, I wanted to continue this annual tradition. May it inspire you to embrace life even more fully and bravely than you already are, and enjoy each day all the more. Let's get started. First lesson, number 1. Ask questions if you don't understand, and keep asking questions until you do understand. As I have been stepping entirely into running my own business over these past 4 years, no longer having that income from teaching, having retired in 2021, the learning curve has taken time, as I would have, expected. Hoped would be really short. Of course, you always hope that. But just learning how all the pieces work so that there aren't any big surprises. So, for example, no big surprise, big tax bill. A yearly tax bill or maintenance required on the blog without knowing how to do it to ensure that it keeps running as it should. Of course, you never know how long, as I just said, the learning curve is going to be, but whatever the length of it, you keep applying what you learn. And gradually, at times, all of a sudden, things start to settle into a knowing groove of how things flow. You understand what your CPA is asking you in the questions with regards to what you're supposed to give them for filing purposes. You actually get to the point where they don't have to ask you any more questions because you already provided everything they needed, and would have asked for. Now, through both of those examples, both through understanding the tax situation and also understanding how my website works and how it needs to be maintained, when it came to understanding all that, I just continued and continue asking questions. And anyone who has expertise in those particular areas or any area that I don't have it, by asking and then receiving answers, that's when the fear starts to dissipate. And you begin to realize you can figure out the unknowns that might pop up from time to time, either on your own. You figure it out by searching or doing the research or whatnot, or knowing who you can reach out to for help. And I think I've shared this before in the past, but sometimes you do have to go through a few people. I went through a few CPAs before I finally found the CPA business and company that I feel comfortable with. And it just takes time. But I didn't stop asking questions. And then I didn't stop, looking at my budget. And it's been a journey in stepping into myself and being strong enough to ask questions and to not just accept everything at face value. And so we'll start off with that one. Ask questions if you don't understand and keep asking them until you do. That will evaporate that fear. Number 2, savoring the seasons. All the details sprinkles life with so much delight and celebration in the everyday. As I have reflected through all of my Instagram photos over the past 12 months, I was reminded of how the beauty and simple luxuries change as the seasons move along. And oh, what beauty there was to savor throughout the entire year. From tulips in the spring to the fresh tomatoes at the farmer's market in the summer, pumpkin shopping with the pups in autumn, and of course, where we find ourselves now and coming a bit out of this time of year, the gorgeous multiple feet deep snowshoeing paths carved out of the woods for us to traverse. Beauty is everywhere if we take notice, and when we do, life becomes a treasure, reminding us of how fortunate we are to be able to witness it every single day, year round. So that's number 2. Savoring the seasons really amplifies the enjoyment of life. 3, prioritizing Nell, my young pups growing up during her first 2 years to welcome her into Norman in my life was more than worth the effort. So when I say we, Norman and I, decided to welcome Nell into our life back in 2022, I told myself that for the first 2 years, I wouldn't take any extensive travel unless she could stay at home and with someone she knew, which is what I did when I did go to England in October 2023. So I waited over a year before I traveled. And when I did, my mom came and stayed. So she was with someone she knew and she was in her house with Norman. But that was the only time we were separated for those first 2 years. And they say the first 2 years are basically obviously puppy stage, but then adolescent stage. They're really learning and searching and exploring and building their confidence and trust. And it's when you really have a lot of opportunity to deepen that relationship, but also establish some really helpful skills, keep them safe, but also bring out their amazing gifts and abilities. And so throughout those 2 years, and I'm still doing this obviously, but I was very, very intentional those first 2 years. I did my best to pay attention to all of the experiences she had, along with introducing her to as many new and varied experiences and trying to make them as positive as possible. And Norman, of course, played a significant role in this. He was really the model that she looked to. I mean, she was able to just be a puppy because she kind of had this safety with him. He was her rock. He was her anyway. I've shared this before in different posts. I won't go on about that, but that sincerely helped. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't his job, but she just looked to him. So from things as simple as the vacuum cleaner and being thoughtful not to scare her so I could build that trust. And Norman modeled this perfectly well because he lets me vacuum or let me vacuum around him, coming within an inch of his toes, mopping because he knows I'm not going to touch him. He knows I'm not going to bother him. His angst is not my entertainment. Never has and never will be with my dogs. And so she observed this. And so now she's stoic. She won't move when I vacuum. She's not yet there laying on the ground when I mop because she's usually not sleeping on the floor. She likes her chairs. But the point is, I was very intentional about those little everyday things, not to cause unnecessary stress. We would go to the farmer's market and it would be jam packed with people. I mean, just shoulder to shoulder during like 4th of July, and she'd be right there. Norman was chill as a cucumber, happy as a clam. And she's like, okay, Norman is, and I am too. If mom's cool, I'm cool. But she was really looking at Norman. So she was friendly and safe, and she got blueberries from various stands. They loved treating the pups. And then, of course, traveling in the car, visiting the ocean, sitting and behaving well at outdoor cafes. Now, that last one took time. It wasn't until, what was it? Actually, it wasn't until she was 2.5 that she actually will sit, whether at the hair salon or at a bookshop, for long durations, and she'll just lay there and she won't chew on something. She went through a few things. She chewed on a few things. But again, it was, and working on that. So I really tried to be intentional about that. And I'm really seeing this adult puppy now. She's 2.5. She is one of the most well-mannered dogs I could have ever hoped for, and then some. She models Norman in so many ways and how she behaves, her curiosity, her trust, her calm, as well as brings herself. Super loving to everyone and wanting to give them a cavalier hug, as they say. And I look forward to continuing to travel with her even more in the future. So if you have a dog or you're thinking about getting a dog, it will pay off in dividends. You're going to have to put a lot of work into it, but it's so worth it. That's number 3. Number 4, savoring everyday moments with those you love deeply and with great intention makes the goodbyes less heart-wrenching. So the shock of Norman's death, and if you've listened to episode 396, Norman was 15 and a half, lived a long, lovely life with me and Nell and Oscar. And it was shocking because it happened before I had anticipated that it might. And I know that sounds silly. But it was still devastating, even though he was 15 and a half. It still is. We're still mourning. I'm still grieving. But what brings me some peace is that I know we savored, he and I, and with Nell, but he and I directly, literally savored every day together and the moments throughout each of those days. I was very acutely aware after Oscar passed away about just the reality of it. Not that I was unaware before Oscar passed away, but I became more acutely aware. And that was part of the 2 years staying home too, is to be with Norman and to be with to not travel so much so I could have these last handful of years with him and not lose a moment. So since we never know when that last day will be for our loved ones, that last conversation, the last cuddle with a loved one, waiting until the end is not wise. Love now. Love today. Do it often. Do it regularly and be brave in your loving. This will bring you comfort later while you grieve. That's number 4. Savoring everyday moments with those you love deeply and with great intention makes goodbyes less heart-wrenching. All right. I'll be back with the remaining 4 lessons I learned in my 46th year after these 2 sponsors. The Simple Sophisticate is sponsored by Indeed. So when you're working for yourself, you can't wear all the hats. You need to often hire out for freelance work or contract work. And that is when Indeed has stepped in for me when I need web tech support, when I need a web guru to fix some things, to fix some coding, things like that. And I can rest easy because I can find the help I need quickly and it is high quality. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job posts seen on other job sites. Indeed's Sponsored Jobs helps you stand out and hire fast. With Sponsored Jobs, your job jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates so you can reach the people you want faster. And it makes a huge difference, according to Indeed data. Sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored posts. Plus, with Indeed Sponsored Jobs, there are no monthly subscriptions, no long-term contracts, and you only pay for results. How fast is Indeed? Well, in the minute I've been talking to you, 23 hires were made on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. As a Simple Sophisticate listener, there's no need to wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/simple. Just go to Indeed.com/simple right now and support this show by saying you heard about Indeed on the Simple Sophisticate podcast. That's Indeed.com/simple. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed, is all you need. Simple Sophisticate is also sponsored by News in Slow French. I know many listeners of this podcast either speak multiple languages or want to speak an additional language. And knowing which source to reach out to help you learn can be overwhelming. There are so many language learning resources available these days, whether in person, online, or through an app. But I want to introduce you to something truly distinctive: News in Slow French, an online program that offers a boutique approach tailored for the sophisticated mind. This exceptional experience is also available in Spanish, Italian, and German. Their boutique approach helps you learn a new language because it requires from the listener a curiosity for intelligent conversations and topics. And News in Slow French is produced by an international team of journalists and linguists. It offers interesting, provocative opinions and debates, and you can join small group discussions that are just as fun and rewarding as private lessons. Programs are crafted for every level, featuring rich and engaging discussions at just the right pace, whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced learner. Picture this. You're immersed in a conversation about a culture, history, or current events, and suddenly you realize you're following along in a foreign language, the language you want to learn. People report a sense of virtual immersion because it doesn't feel like you're studying at all. News in Slow French has over a decade of experience and refinement. They have been producing these podcast episodes for more than 15 years, perfecting their approach. Having been mentioned in the New York Times, Washington Post, and The Economist, it has been used by college students, hobby learners, politicians, and even U.S. presidential candidates. So start your free trial at newsandslowfrench.com, newsandslowspanish.com, or Italian or German today. Your next OMG moment is just a podcast away. Welcome back. Let's dive right back into our list of lessons learned during my 46th year. Number 5, the jubilation of being debt-free will prompt you to celebrate by spending money. Be mindful of this. So you may remember back in episode 388, which was titled Why Not Become the CFO or Chief Financial Officer of Your Own Life and Experience Financial Freedom for the Rest of Your Life, I shared 14 foundational pieces. And this was inspired by my reaching fully being debt-free as far as no HELOC, no credit card debt, things like that. I still have a mortgage. I still have a car payment. But this past year, that was my goal, to get all that paid off. And the final payments of my HELOC or the home equity line of credit happened this year as well, as paying off all the projects that I undertook to customize Le Papillon. And the feeling when I saw zero as the balance after knowing that that debt wasn't bad. We talked about this too in that episode that we just mentioned, 388, as well as one a couple years ago about our love story with money. But knowing that I had given back what I had borrowed to bring the life I love, that brings me to life, I had made good on it. So to see zero was exhilarating. It took effort, it took planning, it took patience and discipline, but it did happen. And I'm so glad that I tended to it sooner rather than later and gradually paid it off, but instead just really buckled down and did it as quickly as possible. However, now that that's behind me, I can say that when you become entirely debt-free and you see your credit score soar, mine went all the way up to 825, you may want to celebrate, understandably, to reward yourself by getting something or doing something. So it involves spending money. This is a very natural, understandable thing to want to do. You've been essentially not starving yourself. I don't want to make it sound horrible, but you've been really disciplined and not spending your money on discretionary things that you may have in the past. And while this is okay in moderation, it's also helpful to know that you may have to tone a new muscle to not spend the money that you used to allot to your debt payments each month. And that muscle is not used to being used. And I think that's so important to just be aware of. Now, I mean, I'm looking back and I know that was the case, and I'll explain in a second, but it was just this, it is a muscle. It's a discipline. It's part of how and why my financial Fridays have been really helpful. Because I got excited. I was like, oh, I don't have any debt payments. Woohoo, let's go design a closet. And I did that, as you know. I designed, I customized my primary closet. It's not a big closet, but it was, it's something I'd always wanted to do. And I was finally able to do it. And I'm not regretting it. I love it. And the other reason I'm so glad I did it when I did it is that Norman loved that closet, and it had to do with the flooring and the lighting. It's really welcoming in there. And the flooring is so soft. And he especially loved the carpet that I put down, but then the rug on top of the carpet. It was where he would prefer to take his naps. If I was in the kitchen or the living room, and he could see me, that's where he would go and take his naps. He loved it. So I don't regret it. But while it was a project that I could afford, I really just, as you know, invested in quality. And so I did take out a short loan for a few months to pay it off. It's all paid off now. But the point is, I hadn't toned that muscle and I had no debt payments. And so I just jumped head in. And the other part of the muscle toning is that I was so accustomed to doing project after project after project. As you know, for over 3 years, I've been customizing my house, and this was the 4th year. And so I was like, you know what? I have this one more big project that I want to get done, the primary bedroom and the closet. Let's just do it. You can do it now. And so it's this pausing, celebrating, yes. And I did buy a few things that I had said, okay, this is a reward, get this. And that, that was out of pocket, no problem. But I think it's just to be aware that if you haven't kept that muscle toned, and you haven't because you've been really, really restricting yourself, really just be cognizant that you might spend more money than than you normally would, even without the discipline. So creating new habits takes time, as we know, and our spending or approaches to money aren't any different. Those are habits. How we think about, the money that comes in that now has no place to go. Well, maybe put a pause on it or portion of it, put it somewhere where you're not immediately putting it into, being spent already. So it takes time to become used to having that extra money, as was the case in my situation. A lovely problem that I now am grateful to have learned the lesson, and I want to pass it on to you. So number 5 is the jubilation of being debt free will prompt you to celebrate by spending money. So just be mindful of that. Number 6, celebrate your birthday by treating yourself to a special experience each year. So I want to begin with this quote, and it'll kind of give you a hint of what we're going to talk about. This is from Gertrude Stein, who spent much of her life, latter half of her life, in Paris, in France. It is not what France gave you, but what it did not take away from you that is important. So if you've been a listener of this show for a while, you know that back in late 2022, I had an interview with American interior designer who is now living in Paris, has an apartment in Paris on the Ile Saint Louis, as well as a country home, just about an hour or so outside of Paris. That was David Jimenez, and that was in episode 346. And he shared something in that interview that I'll never forget. He shared that for many years, until he moved to France, he would celebrate his birthday by taking a trip to France for a good long while, so a couple weeks. And that was his gift to himself. Since then, I have been holding this idea that he shared as a goal that I wanted to be able to achieve and then follow through on each year. And when I was able to do so back in September, I purchased the plane tickets for my trip to France that I'm taking this month in March. And I made them for March for reasons that have to do with my dogs. Because I wanted to be home to spend my birthday with them. Because I always spend my birthday with them. So that was the kind of adjustment to this. But I wanted it to be really close to my birthday. And also, here in February and in March, it's kind of like winter just drags on. So it was a perfect time to get out, because I can't really be out in the garden too much now, if at all. And I'm aching to be out in the garden right now. And so I thought, this is perfect. I share this with you because there may be times as an adult you think, oh, this isn't the big birthday. I can't do something big. But I say, don't wait for those big numbers, the fives, the zeros, you know what I'm talking about. It doesn't have to come every 5 or 10 or whatever years. Your birthday is important every year. And it's not about spoiling ourselves, but about celebrating your presence and strengthening your muscle of listening and honoring yourself. And to honor that skill that we talked about back in episode 398, just a couple weeks ago, let me take responsibility for living fully. Enrich your soul, your being. Remind yourself that you're alive. And whether it's a trip to a foreign country or simply a weekend getaway, give yourself an experience that is yours completely. And look forward to it as you're planning it, whenever you make the reservations, buy the tickets or whatnot. And yeah. I'm currently in France as you're listening to this, and just arrived. And I hope to make this, in some way or another, a regular experience every year. I'll let you know how it goes in my travel diaries. as I've told you, I'm sharing travel diaries while I'm there with top tier members. But yeah, so number 6 is celebrate your birthday by treating yourself to a special experience each year. Number 7 is that the death of a loved one doesn't take the love you lost away. It just changes how it is presented in your life. And it also ties into don't seek closure when it comes to And I'll write a detailed post about this later in the spring once I've processed everything. But there was a lovely reminder from a long-term member of our community, Judy M., who talked about this. And I actually heard this in an interview recently with, I can't remember who it was, when they spoke about death. Closure is a word that really shouldn't pertain to someone we've lost, a loved one we've lost. Because to close means to end, and that love does not end. You carry them with you forever. The grief will change. How you mourn is going to change as you move through it, but it never ends. It's not a bad thing. That's not a sad thing. There's sad moments, but there's also this realizations that you come to as you're going through this process, and you never want to not have lived and loved this soul. And so that's why closure will never happen. And I'm so grateful that Judy shared that with our community. And I'm also grateful to have read it somewhere. And he was an expert in psychology with regards to grieving and love. And I was like, thank you so much for validating that. But let's talk about that, though. The love does not go away. You don't lose it. So while, of course, I would prefer to have Norman with me physically, I mean, I can still imagine him sitting in his favorite chairs throughout the house. I still see him laying in his dog bed in the office right here next to me. I still see him tottering along on our walks. Just thinking about it makes me happy and also get teary-eyed, knowing that I will never physically see him. But he will always be in my heart. That love we shared, that love I was so fortunate to have in my life from such a precious soul has changed me irrevocably, and I am beyond grateful. That love goes on, but now it will show up in how I think, live, engage with the world, knowing I know what real love feels like when it is in your life, and Norman showed me that. So if you have lost someone or you're fearing that coming, just know that love never goes away. And love, as we talked about earlier, love now. And it will make the grieving not less, but there's that, it's almost like a blanket. Keeps you comforted, keeps you warm. Okay. That's number 7. Number 8. So I was listening to an interview with Edward Norton, who plays Pete Seeger in A Complete Unknown, the biopic about Bob Dylan. And he said something that I had experienced throughout the year. And I was like, oh, he's so right. It's so true. But here's the thing. Sometimes there's going to be a moment in your life that crystallizes exactly what you are passionate about, that you're either put here on this earth to do, or that you will do even if no one pays you, that it brings you to life. And you just know in that moment, it's like, that's it. That's it. But sometimes it comes from a huge, painful rejection from people you either respect or that are respected in that field. And so Edward Norton was talking about this, and I experienced it this year as well. Number 8 is sometimes the best way to gain clarity is to be told no by someone expert in their field, in the field that you are passionate about, in the field that you're investing your life in and in your focus in, whatever it might be. When you, and it could be prompted by so many things. It might be, as Edward Norton's case was, he went in for an audition. And it was one of the most, he said, one of the most renowned or respected talent agents in the field. To get in front of this person was like the ultimate. And the person basically said, stop acting. You're not going to be an actor. Stop it. And obviously they didn't stop him. But what he said is it clarified that that's what he wanted to do. It just spurred him on to keep doing it. It didn't stop him. And in a lot of cases, that would stop someone. I know, I mean, you think back to the things you're not doing now that you thought about trying. I mean, here we go. 5th grade person, me playing the drums, went to band class. Okay, this isn't fun. I don't want to put in the practice. I mean, same thing with some other musical instruments. It wasn't my passion. And it didn't take someone telling me, no, you stink at it to stop it. But I heard myself. And then I was like, I know I could get better, but I don't want to put the effort in. And so it really comes down to that. You're like, I'm going to keep doing this. And I'm going to keep trying. And I have a passion for it. And I'm decent at it. decent enough to feel it forward. And other people have said different things, and you just keep going. And I think it's a very fork in the road moment. But the beautiful part about those moments, and this is what I learned too, is there's not a doubt in your mind. It doesn't scare you off. It just fires you up. And for me, it fired me up. I was like, oh, and I'm just like, onward. Didn't even cross my mind to trust the words that they said, because I knew better, because I'd had more experience than they gave me credit for. And not to say that I was perfect or that I couldn't grow. It wasn't that at all. So if you've ever been in that situation where someone, basically says, go a different direction, you stink, or go a different direction, this is not for you, but you love it with all your heart and soul, be grateful for that moment. I know I am. And the odd part is you're probably going to be grateful for that moment almost immediately. And that too is a sign. That too is a sign. So that's the final lesson. I have had many, many more, but I will not drone on about them. But those are the ones I hope you find helpful in your own life journey. And so with that, another personal new year begins. As I mentioned a second ago, join me virtually in France, as I will be sharing 2 travel diaries, maybe 3. We'll just see how things work out with my schedule, but for sure 2 travel diaries. They'll come on the blog on Tuesdays, along with a new episode on the 19th. So I'm going to be sharing with you part 9 of what I've learned in French class so far on the 19th. So and then the this and that's will come on every Friday. I don't skip those when I travel. I don't skip travel diaries when I travel, and you will have your new podcast episodes as well. Other than that, everything else is on pause until I get back. I won't be posting much on Instagram. So when I go travel, I try to stay off Instagram. No stories, not a lot of pics. I save that for top tier members, and I save it for the travel diaries, and in the future, French Week, which will occur in August, because I really want to be as present as possible. So be sure to explore becoming a top tier member. There are so many benefits along with being able to read those travel diaries. Let's see. Yeah, it's time to get to the petit plaisir. I'll be right back to share with you this episode's petit plaisir. So this episode's petit plaisir is Bridget Jones' Mad About the Boy. It is the 4th and final book in the Bridget Jones series created by Helen Fielding. And the original book was published back in 2000, and I believe it was 14, something like that. And we finally have the film now. And has someone who, I remember watching the very first film when it came out, reading the book when it came out, the first one. I enjoyed the first film. I didn't really like the second book or the second film. It was just different. I really liked the third book and movie with regards to when she gave birth to her first child. But I loved this 4th one. I felt there was so much heart in it. And I was listening to an interview by with Hugh Grant, because Hugh Grant returns in the 4th one. He's not in the 3rd one, as we know. Remember, we think he's dead, and then at the very end of that film, you see, oh, he's survived. Anyway, so he's back, and I'm so glad he's back. And Hugh Grant was saying, when he read the script, because he was considered for the 3rd film. He shared this in this interview. He was considered for the 3rd film. They tried to put him in the 3rd film. He said he kept looking at that script and going, Daniel Cleaver is just never going to have a kid, never going to want to have a kid. Anyway, they went on to all this conversation. And as we know, in the 4th film, he does have a child, Enzo, but not with Bridget. And as we know that too. I'm saying things if you're a Bridget fan. But what I want to share with you is they wanted him in the 3rd film, but he, as an actor who knew the character, didn't feel that it was fitting. And so they wrote it the way they wrote it. And then when he read the script for the 4th film, he said he started to cry. And he thought it was so heartfelt because it is inspired by Helen Fielding's actual life journey of losing her own husband to death and becoming a widow. And as we know, the 4th film begins with us learning about Darcy having been killed 4 years prior in an incident in the Sudan while he's working in a bomb blast. And It is a beautiful film about being an adult in wanted and unwanted situations, navigating, as we know, she's in her 50s, early 50s, dating. They never say her age in the film, which I think is beautiful. As we know, Renee Zellweger is 55, looks freaking amazing. But they actually literally don't say an age for her, which I think is awesome too. But she has her two children, and that's the other part of what makes, I think, this film so delightful. Unexpectedly so, because sometimes when you have kids in films, it just doesn't work. And she's like, these two children were delightful. And such loving relationships with Bridget, and uniquely different children. And I was watching a video, and I put this on the This and That 2 weeks ago, of how they decorated the set, her home in Hampstead Heath. Very intentional. Very intentional. So if you watch it again or you watch it for the first time, look at all the details in the decor in that home. It is so down to the little tiny drawing on the floorboards in the children's room of little ladybug. The artwork for Mabel's corner of the bedroom, and the science and the stars, and all the different things for the child, the son's corner of the room. And the other part that I really appreciated was the symbolism of the owl, representing their father, watching over them. And it's just a film that will warm your heart. I think it would be a lovely film to watch in the holiday season because it ends on New Year's Eve, or I guess you'd say New Year's Day. It's a 2-hour-long film. They don't hold back. And in an interview with Renee Zellweger, with an Australian newscast, she shared that Helen told her, at least now, this is the last book. This is the last book. This is the last chapter of Bridget. And you kind of get that idea in the credits, as the credits roll, that they're saying goodbye. This is the end. But it's a lovely ending. And it's a journey. They don't pit men against each other, thankfully. I know, throughout the first 3, they did. In this one, they didn't, which I thought was a good idea. And I did want to share this too. So there was an interview with Helen Fielding in the book review, in the New York Times book review a couple weeks ago. And they asked her, with all the voiceover that Bridget does, what are some voiceovers that didn't make it the cut? And in this film, there's voiceover, but there's not as much voiceover, I don't think. But maybe I need to go back and watch the other films. And the first thing that she said, or the only thing she said, is, I wish they would not have cut out. And she'd been trying to put this, I guess, in previous films too, the voiceover about Bridget having a conversation with her mother and not making her feel as though she's enough ever, and letting them have that conversation. But I guess she's tried to have it in the previous films, as she alluded to that, and she wanted it definitely in this film, and they cut it out. I think that would have been a really nice thing to have, in all sincerity, mother-daughter relationship. And those two, as we know, are very distinctly different. So anyway, I know I've kind of spoiled a bit, but like I said, I watched it twice. I liked it even more the second time because I saw more details, and it's just happy and genuine and loving and playful. And you see all of the cast back, all of them back 20 years later. It's so amazing to see them all. Even Darcy in her flashbacks. So, and before I forget, so I love watching credits, and who produces films and who writes the screenplay. Because even though this was based on the novel that Helen Fielding wrote, they have to adapt it to the screen. And one of the co-writers with Helen Fielding was Abby Morgan. So if you love The Split with Nicola Walker, Abby Morgan was the creator and the sole writer of The Split. She co-wrote the screenplay for this Bridget Jones. I mean, I adore Abby's writing in The Split. So good, so good. Anyway, I just wanted to add a little tidbit. That next trivia night you go to, you'll know when they have Bridget Jones questions. Okay. With that said, after all that rambling, I hope you've enjoyed this episode's Petit Plaisir, where each episode ideas are shared to make the everyday all the more enjoyable. Tune in at the end of each episode where I'll recommend a book, a film, a show, a recipe, anything that is a simple pleasure to satiate your sophisticated taste. All right, I will be back on Wednesday, the 19th of March, with episode 400. Yes, we've made it to 400, and I'll be talking about what I learned in French class so far, part 9. Have a wonderful start to the new month of March. Thank you so much for joining me today. Bonne journée. Thank you for tuning in to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. For more ideas and inspiration throughout the week, visit the blog, The Simply Luxurious Life, with the shortened URL tsll.co or thesimplyluxuriouslife.com. For more in-depth exploration of how to cultivate your own unique, simply luxurious life, pick up my new book, which became both a bestseller and #1 new release in France Travel, The Road to Le Papillon, Daily Meditations on True Contentment. Available in all 4 formats for your preferred reading or listening. My first book, titled Choosing the Simply Luxurious Life, and my second book, Living the Simply Luxurious Life, are also available in each of the 4 formats. Readers can now join the more intimate The Simply Luxurious Life international community by becoming members of the blog, which offers the benefits of ad-free reading site-wide, unlimited access and exclusive access to content on the blog, such as the monthly A Couple Moments with Shannon video chat, tours of my home Le Papillon, the monthly What Made Me Smile post, and monthly Ponderings post, as well as the exclusive opportunity to enter all of the giveaways during the annual French and British weeks. To stay caught up on all things Simply Luxurious, the podcast, blog post, the cooking show, and receive exclusive news, as well as an extra dose of inspiration to jumpstart each new month, subscribe to the Simply Luxurious Life's free monthly newsletter, arriving on the last day of each month in your inbox. There is also a weekly newsletter, which is also free, and arrives each Friday to keep you caught up on the recent weekly posts on the blog. Enjoy with a hot cuppa or cup of morning coffee, and stay in the know about all things simply luxurious. Look for 2 new episodes of this podcast on the 1st and 3rd Wednesday of each month. And until next time, I'm your host, Shannon Ables. Thank you for tuning in. Bonne journée.